What's going on, everybody? Today we are previewing all things about the 2025 Washington Commanders, including if Terry McLaurin and Deebo Samuel are veteran traps or perhaps great values at their current ADPs. We're going to hear from the great Austin Ekeler himself, as well as breaking down whether or not Mr. Ekeler and Brian Robinson are great zero RB targets. And we'll also talk through Jayden Daniels and his path and potential QB1 upside in Fantasyland. All that and much more on today's Fantasy Life show. And accordingly, let's get right after it. And by let's, I mean myself and Fantasy Life Director of Analytics, Dwain "The Rock" McFarland. And Dwain, we're going to start things off with these wide receivers because, again, last year really was just a Terry McLaurin show, but now in the offseason, we did see Washington go ahead and get a true number two in the form of Deebo Samuel. So we'll get into what makes Deebo potentially a great fit in Cliff Kingsbury's offense in just a minute. But right now, we do have a bit of a disgruntlement going on in Washington. Terry wants to get paid after putting on, let's face it, the best season of his career. Obviously didn't exactly have the best quarterbacks to work with during the first portion. But what did you see from Terry in 2024, and how confident are you in him keeping the good times rolling ahead of 2025?
Look, Terry will be 30 years old, like you talked about, the holdout, assuming they get that all worked out. Like, he's still a player we like, but I do think that he's slightly overpriced. He is falling a little bit right now because of the holdout. But, I mean, we're talking about a guy that you were having to take as a borderline wide receiver one about a week or two ago. And that was just really tough for me, Ian. If you're getting to take him, as a low-end wide receiver two, I would have no problem, right? We just saw that he could pay that off. He could do it again with touchdowns. But that's the biggest issue. We would expect that if Jayden Daniels arriving on the scene suddenly turned Terry McLaurin into this next level wide receiver that we think we could count on year after year, I think there are some other underlying data points that would have also changed. And that's the biggest thing we like to look at it with fantasy. At first, you keep it simple, guys. Like, you look at their fantasy points per game, how consistent have they been? That's your first pass at it. And then you're looking at the underlying data points to say, is there something here that's a little bit wonky that maybe this player's overrated, or maybe they're underrated? And that's the challenge here with McLaurin. Yes, the touchdowns went up. He scored 13 after scoring 4, 5, 6, 4, and 7 in the previous seasons. And I get it. You guys are listening and you're going, hey, dummy, he's playing with Jayden Daniels. So great. He doesn't get 13, maybe he gets 9 or 10. And that is true. That's still in his range of outcomes. But it's these other numbers, Ian, that still have me a little bit worried. 21% targets per route, or his 21% target share, still right there in the range with really what we've seen from low-end wide receiver twos to wide receiver threes. It's not like he suddenly started getting all these extra targets. Yards per route run did get a little bit better, 1.98 with Daniels. It's 1.86 over his 3-year career. But still, those are wide receiver 3 to low-end wide receiver 2 numbers as well. And then his PFF receiving grades, another thing I look at. It's a wide receiver 2 worthy number. So I just don't want to draft him at that borderline wide receiver 1 price tag. Now, if he continues to fall and he's more of a mid-range wide receiver 2, I'll get on board a little bit. I really do believe, though, that like his price tag should be more like a low-end wide receiver 2. He's mostly been a wide receiver 3 for his fantasy career. I could get on board at that point, but with him going where he's been going, like, it's just been a little bit tough.
Career finishes in PPR points per game. He's finished 29th, 20th, 30th, 23rd, 36th, and then last season 14th. So again, if you just knew nothing else and you had to kind of pick which year is the outlier, 2024 would be that answer. So the targets really were the most surprising part to me, Dwain, because again, obviously adding Jayden Daniels, we expected the efficiency to go up, but this is what kind of gives me pause with fully investing in someone like, say, Calvin Ridley or Garrett Wilson, when you just say, oh my God, there's nowhere else to throw the football. These guys are going to have 200 targets, only 117 targets for Terry McLaurin last year, man. That was his fewest since his rookie year when he wasn't even able to suit up every single game. So again, not debating Terry standing as a great real life player, but when you do add in legit target competition like Deebo, it is a bit concerning when we're now trying to basically purchase him at his highest price ever. Certainly Father Time undefeated as well. So again, Terry, not trying to hate on the player or anything like that, but I will say, Dwain, I personally, last year, all over, drafting this dude pretty much whenever. I thought wide receiver 3 price tag. But right now, man, going wide receiver 17 next to guys like Tyreek Hill, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Devontae Adams. I'm not gonna lie, man, I have not made a habit of clicking his name so far.
Yeah, I've hardly picked Terry at all. And earlier it was really hard to even get him stacked up with Jayden, but now that he is starting to slide a little bit, Jayden usually goes in round 4. You do get a chance to kind of match them. So I'm probably going to try it a couple times. But if I'm playing in 1 or 2 home leagues, I just don't see Terry McLaurin being a pick that I'm making very often in 2025 fantasy football.
brings us to Deebo Samuel, who again let a lot of people down in 2024, albeit perhaps had a bit more to do with some injuries and even a case of pneumonia than we all realize. Again, one of these things where I think we're all very aware of injuries when they're happening and when they're actively influencing a player's game status. But after they kind of get back there on the field, we have a tendency to assume they're 100%, when in reality, a lot of these guys are probably still playing through all sorts of pain. So it really was a stark, just discrepancy in terms of performance, Dwayne. We're talking about in weeks 1 through 6 last year, Deebo averaging 14.1 PPR points per game, good for wide receiver 25 status. However, weeks 8 through 17, just 9.4 fantasy points per game, all the way down there sitting as the wide receiver 54. So again, one of these situations where we do have a lot larger sample of Deebo being rather freaking awesome at football than him not. That said, father time, maybe just maybe a certain video getting leaked out, when they were freaking installing. I can't believe the amount of uproar over that. But anyway, where do you fall on Deebo in terms of him being washed, or maybe being someone that we can actually finally buy at a low price? And yeah, we should get behind it.
I mean, look, he's going to be almost 30 years old when the season starts, 29.7. So, I mean, he's definitely getting up there. This is a guy that's got touches on him as a running back and all these different things. You talked about it, really was a fall off last year. But if you looked at when he was healthy, he looked more like what we had seen in his previous seasons. And so if we go back, he had 10.4 fantasy points last year. To your point, it was 14 before the pneumonia. Okay, if we look at the previous season, 16.2, 13.3, and then, of course, that just boom year of 21.1 where he went berserk. So the fantasy points really over the last 3 years, if we look at what he did early last year, are pretty close, Ian. And then if you look at his target earning ability, it went down last year, 19% versus where he had been at 22, 24, and 25 in the years before. And you hear those numbers, you're like, oh, that sounds like a downward trend, 25, 24, 22, down to 19. And there probably is some of that going on, but I'm still not to the point to where I just think that Deebo is completely washed in. He's never really been a man beater, but man, he's been amazing against zone coverage, and it all comes down to how you build out your concepts. Here are his targets per route run against zone coverage over the last 4 years. Last year wasn't good, 19%, but before that, 25, 26, and 27%. That's some of the best in the league. And so what you're doing as a coordinator, you're really giving your quarterback two options. It's based on whether they're seeing man or zone. And if it's zone, you're going to go underneath the zone coverage, right? And you're going to throw the ball to Deebo Samuel in most of those scenarios, right? There are certain zone coverages still be designed to take that away. But think, guys, the league does mostly run zone about 70% of the time, and that's a positive for Deebo. Now let's talk about what we see with Cliff Kingsbury. There's a couple things here. If we look at the screen game, it's a perfect fit with Deebo and what we were just talking about. In 2024 with the Commanders, he had the third most wide receiver screens in the league, and he was throwing them to Dyami Brown. 11 of those 49 went to Terry McLaurin, so a few of them. But he's dialing up stuff, and we're not saying Dyami Brown's a bad player. But guys, if Deebo's even 90% of the old Deebo, 85% of the old Deebo, he's going to be better on those targets than Dyami Brown, right? Go back to the Cardinal years with Cliff Kingsbury in 2022, the second most screens to wide receivers in the league with 48. And in 2021, you guessed it, he had the most wide receiver screens. So he's very this is a thing that Cliff Kingsbury loves. He wants to create these different kind of layers horizontally, and Deebo fits into that. Look at RPO. Think about RPO with Jayden Daniels, right? You got the option to run, you got the option to hand it off, or you got the option to hit Deebo Samuel and basically let him be your running back sitting out there in a similar play to a screenplay. Commanders were the fourth in wide receiver RPO targets last year. Ian, with the Cardinals, he ranked 10th and 8th. So again, that's another thing weighing in for Deebo. And here's the final thing. Kingsbury's also had a fetish with wanting to let his wide receivers run the football. He's not really had one they can do it with. He tried it with Rondale Moore. There's some other guys he tried it to sprinkle it in a little bit with. Last year, not so much, only 6 wide receiver rushing attempts. They didn't have someone that really fit that bill. But in 2022 with the Cardinals, 18 rushing attempts to his wide receivers. That ranked 8th in the NFL. And then in 2021, 21 rushing attempts to wide receivers. That ranked 5th in the NFL. So you add it up, screen game, RPO, what he wants to do as far as getting the running backs involved in the run game. Man, if Deebo is not washed, he landed in the best spot he could have outside of being on the 49ers. I really think we could legitimately make that argument. Like, I think maybe we could have argued had he landed with the Rams, right? Somewhere like that, we would have liked it. But I really think that beyond Cliff Kingsbury, beyond staying with the 49ers, maybe the Rams, like this is the best landing spot we could have hoped for with Deebo. Now, do we know or if he's washed or not? I don't think we completely know that. There is a chance that Deebo is washed, but to your point, there's enough of a reason that we could say why some of those numbers fell off last year that I think even though he might not be 100% what he used to be, I think 90% of Deebo playing in an offense that really does know how to cater to what he's doing, I think Deebo is actually a value. He's the wide receiver 39 right now. It's not like you're having to spend a big pick on Deebo, and that's round 6 on Underdog. It's not going to be round 6 for you guys in home leagues, right? Because people don't draft wide receivers as early as Underdog where you're going to have to take him in that round. Probably going to be more of a round 8 or round 9 pick for Deebo Samuel, and then you're getting even more meat on the bone. So my final verdict here, man, Terry McLaurin, a little worried that he's overpriced, but with Deebo, man, I can see a lot of paths to him paying off this ADP.
And I think where he goes to, I mean, it's not like I'm not drafting other wide receivers around him. We have Jacoby Myers in that range, Chris Olave, even the Jerry Judys of the world. But there kind of is this weird drop-off in running back, in my opinion, where after James Conner and David Montgomery, we start getting the Travion Hendersons, the Quinshon Judkins rookies, who I think are maybe just still a bit inflated from talking about them all offseason. Whereas, man, about 10 wide receivers or so after Deebo, that is where that cliff happens. So I'm with you in terms of Deebo, really where he goes in the draft, and especially in home leagues where that's all of a sudden going to be rounds later, does stand out as someone where, hey man, we could be sitting here in week 1 going, oh yeah, it's Deebo Samuel. He's going to get 8 or 9 combined targets and carries per game in this offense that we do expect to be pretty good. Why did we overthink this so much? So again, one of these situations where, yeah, there are some concerning red flags, but really does seem like those have been more than baked into his ADP. If we had to buy him, Dwain, as the wide receiver 2, we've had to for the last 3 or 4 years, yeah, I'd be out on that. But wide receiver 4 price tag, that's where we can start getting more excited about it. So good stuff on Terry and Deebo. Now, guys, really, though, the biggest question facing this Washington Commanders team, what to make of this backfield? That's right. It's time for our ADP audit. ADP audit time presented by the fine folks over at Premier National Sports. Dwain, our question for today, are Brian Robinson and Austin Ekeler perfect 0 RB targets in your opinion?
I think they're good, 0 RB targets. Whenever you're going heavy at wide receiver early on, and then maybe you come back and get your quarterback and your tight end, and you're really trying to lean into, like, I'm risking things here. Like, they're going to fit in the profiles, but you know how it works, Ian. They're one of like 6 or 7 running backs you're about to reel off in a row, and you're going to be drafting a bunch of these guys. I will say this: like, if we look back at last year for these two in the games where they were healthy, which essentially we're looking at like 8 or 9 games, including the playoffs. Robinson had 48% of the snaps versus Austin Ekeler at 50%. So almost a true like 50-50 split between the two players. And it was B-Rob getting more of the carries, 40%. And you're going to think, man, that number sounds low, especially when I tell you Ekeler got 18%. Well, remember, guys, they play with this dude called Jayden Daniels, and Jayden Daniels also gets part of those carries, and they like to mix in a third guy a little bit here or there, the Jeremy McNichols types of the world. But if we look at where B-Rob's value really comes from, Ian, it's inside the 5-yard line. He had 61% of the carries inside the 5. So those are high leverage touches where you're getting opportunities to score touchdowns. Jayden Daniels, yeah, he will still a few of those looks down there, but he's more along that Lamar Jackson-esque type of archetype. Not like they're going to be loading him up like we see with Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen and just trying to push into the end zone. He's not as big as those guys. So it leaves some room here. The way Robinson, I think, pays off his ADP and really does end up being a guy that you value as one of these 0 running back targets is he scores 10 or 12 touchdowns. And that can happen in this offense. We like what we're seeing from the Commanders offense. It was obviously good last year. We get a potential upgrade at wide receiver with Deebo Samuel. So I like that. Ekeler, when you look at it, like his role is obviously more in the passing game, right? He had 49% route participation in those games they played together versus 32% for what we saw with B-Rob. And man, he really got that 2-minute offense. And so when we know that the offense has to be passing the ball, the defense is trying to play deep and make you check the ball down. Jayden Daniels actually, he was willing to. Austin Ekeler still had a 13% target share, not like that 15, 18% we saw in his prime, but Jayden was a little bit more willing to check the ball down than we've seen some of these other scramblers do. So I think they both have paths to scoring fantasy points. I'll say this, though. If I had to pick one of them and put my chip and say, hey, if it came down to, one of them were out for a while, I do think Ekeler carries the most upside, Ian, because of what he can do in the passing downs, and we've already seen him be able to do a good job inside the 5-yard line. We saw it for multiple years with the Chargers. He was one of the most effective ball carriers inside the 5. So I think he could do everything. I know he's 30 years old, but man, he also goes quite a bit after Brian Robinson Jr.
And obviously, Jayden Daniels was the premier scrambler in the NFL last season. Not going to spend too much time checking down to his running backs, but we did see that flash to a high level. I mean, when they were playing the Eagles and they actually kind of, were working from behind, which was a rarity for the 2024 Commanders, Ekeler wound up with 8 catches for 89 yards in that game, okay? I mean, he actually was someone that I think Dwain was going to become a staple in lineups with Brian Robinson dealing with knee, hamstring, and ankle injuries. Unfortunately, had his second concussion of the year, and Ekeler accordingly was robbed of, 5 games down the stretch of the season. So my big takeaway, because again, both these guys being so banged up, it was really hard to try to find a split that was like, all right, this is what we can expect in week 1 when both guys are healthy. But the thing was, when B-Rob was out, we saw Ekeler actually have a game with a 70% plus snap rate. And also, when Ekeler was out, we saw the same thing with Brian Robinson. So yes, the Jerry McNichols, the Chris Rodriguez, maybe even the Ja'Cory Kroski Merritts of the world, they're going to be involved to an extent. But to me, man, this is almost like a poor man's version of David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, where together both these guys are going to be, having 50-50, maybe 60-40 in one direction. But we actually can get excited about the standalone value of either guy because, again, we've seen enough evidence from both that they are going to be given pretty close to an every down role when the other is missing. So Ekeler right now, man, he's going alongside the Tyler Algiers of the world, who again just really have no standalone value. I'm with you, man. When you can get that as your RB5 or RB6, I've been drafting a lot of Austin Ekeler this offseason, and hey, I feel good about it.
Yeah, and I think with Brian Robinson Jr., he's the last guy that you can take right now that you have pretty decent understanding of his role and that he's going to give you some standalone value. Mm-hmm. After him is Jordan Mason, who might give standalone value, but we don't know. Like, it could still be more the Aaron Jones show. Jaylen Warren, we want it to be Jaylen Warren. We wanted it to be Jaylen Warren last year, but they did draft Caleb Johnson. There's a chance he's just stuck, in a passing down role. Cam Scattaboo, like, we don't know for sure what's going to happen there. Tyrone Tracy's battling him. You got Najee Harris, who's dealing with Omari and Hampton. Like, Najee could literally be only 30% of the touches right out of the gate if they love Omari and Hampton. They've already been raving about him. Zach Charbonnet, maybe he gets more work under the new coaching staff, but so far when Kenneth Walker's been healthy, it's been the Kenneth Walker show. So I think when you look at Brian Robinson Jr., like sitting there at pick 89, and he's the running back 30, it's kind of the last stop on the train of like, this guy's going to get the early down touches unless he's hurt. And so I think it makes him a really intriguing pick, to your point, especially if you built a zero back team early and that you've got to get touches, right? And you need some chances to score some touchdowns. I think B-Rob picks those up for you. And then you mentioned like Ekeler, it's just going too late because he does have standalone value where he's at. And man, I think people are dismissing what the potential contingent upside can be. Is Ekeler as explosive as he used to be 3 or 4 years ago? No, but it still wasn't terrible. Last year, I think he was like at a 10 or 11% of his carries went for 10 plus yards. So, I mean, it's not like he's like at a 5%, right, in this complete wash player. And again, the targets, we know that he can stay on the field on the passing downs. And if we look at it, like, we like Terry McLaurin, but we just said he's never been an elite target earner. We do like Deebo Samuel, but we still have questions around him. Zach Ertz is getting up there in age. Like, there's a path where Eckler's like the 3rd most targeted player on the team. So I think there are definitely things to like about both players, and we like the offense, which is a big key.
We didn't get the same, season-long explosion as guys like Saquon or Jacobs or Henry, those free agent running backs who found new homes and just, really reinvented their efficiency. But Ekeler, man, in terms of what he did in 2024 versus 2023, it was night and day. I mean, we're talking about his most yards per reception since 2019. We're talking about 4.8 yards per carry, his most since 2018, his second year in the league. Everyone still has that stupid 13-mile-per-hour run against the Packers in their head from 2023 when Ekeler was dealing with a high ankle sprain that he suffered in week 1 the entire year. This dude was out there returning kickoffs for touchdowns, got called back. All right. I understand it's not going to be there in the stat sheet, but really, man, he did look, like a new and improved version of himself. This guy's gone on the record saying that he really shouldn't be the sort of running back you're trying to give 300 carries to. Again, this 1B role with the potential upside for more should things break his way really is a nice value in fantasy land. So again, late round stage, I think Eckler's a smash, and I don't think it's, again, a situation where we need to be hyping it or just, going too in the detail. Brian Robinson is the one where you mentioned his falling among running backs. That's great. I'm with you. Among other positions too, Dwain, it's really great though, because again, we talk about kind of the fall off at quarterback after the big four dual threat guys. They're all well off the board by this point. Top 5 tight ends on average are also gone, and also the top 48 wide receivers. I mean, we're talking about Brian Robinson, a guy who with good health could rack up 250 touches in one of the better offenses in football versus Cooper Kupp, Emeka Egbuka, Michael Pittman. I've drafted some of those guys before, but man, especially in half PPR or God forbid a standard league, man, really should be paying more attention to Brian Robinson at that point in drafts.
Yeah, and with Robinson, I haven't taken him as much, usually because I've already got 2 running backs at that point. And on that kind of build, I'm like, it's not that I don't like him, but I'm probably taking the Egbuka, taking the guy that might give me more upside in the playoffs as a receiver. And again, I'm talking a lot about underdog drafts here where you have to draft 3 wide receivers. They all go super early. And so that's a dynamic, right? That is totally in play. But I think when you look at Brian Robinson Jr., I think it's interesting though, because he becomes one of these names when you hear people talk about. Everybody gets so hung up on league winner, right? The guy that could turn into the guy you took in the 13th round that might be a first round pick next year. Let's be honest, guys. Those are so freaking rare. And most of them that you think are going to hit, they're misses. Go back and listen to the shows and the podcast last year about guys going in rounds 10 to 15 that were running backs that might be a running back, could be a first round running back next year if everything breaks their way. It's just so hard to do. So there's just, and I'm not saying we don't want to aim for upside profiles, but the percentage that we hit on those, and you've done great stuff where you just put out a simple chart of like, look, here's where these players land based on where they're drafted. And a lot of the guys we're talking about in these late rounds we're talking about guys that were taken around 4, 5, 6, 7 of NFL drafts. Brian Robinson is locked into a role. Is he going to be a guy we're taking in round 1 of fantasy drafts next year? No, but does that mean that he can't give you value and still help you win your fantasy league based on the way you construct your roster? Like, he can still do that.
And I will say, man, one of the research charts I've done recently was looking at, just the relationship between a team's scoring offense and then like how they also produce top performing fantasy players at each position. And man, the correlation between quarterback and running backs in their scoring offense blows away every other position. We're talking about, a positive 0.6 correlation for quarterbacks and 0.43 for running backs, wide receivers all the way down there at 0.12, tight ends at 0.08. DST is in the negative for crying out loud. So again, when you are getting to this point in drafts, because I don't always attune to just draft good players from good teams. Fantasy football is that simple. All those players are going inside the top 2 or 3 rounds for a reason. But when you are looking at running back specifically down the line, yeah, let's go ahead and just try to prioritize some that do happen to play in offenses that we can expect more touchdowns from. What a novel concept that is. So again, loving Brian Robinson and Austin Ekeler at ADP. And we want to, again, thank the fine folks at Premier National Sports for bringing ADP audit your way. Can't say enough great things about Premier National Sports. Really is great what they're doing for high schoolers around the country, giving them the resources and the knowledge and the education to just be, knowledgeable in this new era of NIL, where again, you are just tasked with so many freaking questions, man. Look, any high schooler going into college is trying to figure out their life. Now imagine the chance to actually make life-changing money on top of that. You would hate to not, again, be prepared or just know what's going on. So Premier National Sports, again, just really helping take high school athletes to the next level, and they're going to help you get incentivized accordingly through that. So it's a trusted recruiting and NIL resource for high school athletes and their families. Again, helping rising high school athletes take their game to the next level with personalized recruiting strategies and NIL education. Check them out if you have not already. You can get in touch with their team at premiernationalsports.com. Great stuff. Appreciate you guys. And now, guess what? We got a chance to talk to Austin Ekeler himself. All right, everyone, it's time for a very special guest. We're talking about Fantasy Football Hall of Famer. He's probably won you a championship or two if you've been in this thing long enough. And just wanted to say that with us presenting the Austin Ekeler, us at Fantasy Life, we are very proud to support Austin's charity leagues. You can actually go check out the Austin Ekeler Foundation at www.ekelerfoundation.com. And we have donated premium subs as an incentive for anyone who signs up. Have a QR code on this video and also a link in the video description where you can pick the player whose league you want in and go and do some good in the world. So Austin, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it.
Hey, Austin, I'm going to jump straight in here. Like, you were one of these players that started off in a smaller role early in your career, but you were super efficient, explosive. Were doing everything right. And that ultimately led to you getting this larger and larger role. But it doesn't always work out for all these fantasy players like that. Like Jaylen Warren's a great example in Pittsburgh. And I've done some research recently that actually just showed that like even a lot of these backs that like are really good and not in a full-time workload, it doesn't ultimately lead to like this full-time workload. And so the thing Ian and I have said, hey, there's something in our spreadsheets that like we're not accounting for. There's something that the coaches see. There's something that's going on where some of these players like you, Tony Pollard, do eventually evolve into this larger role and then others that don't get to. Is there anything that you can shed, like some insights there as to, you know, what's the potential thing that we should be doing a better job of looking for that goes beyond just our spreadsheet and what the nerds are looking at?
Well, you know, you're already at a disadvantage because you're not in, you know, the meetings with the GM and ownership. And so very speculative, obviously, as is my opinion that I'm about to share, because I'm also not in those discussions. But here's what I would say. It really comes down to the role that player, like for myself, what role is this person going to be taking? And like for me, it was like, hey, Austin, you're going to be kind of this committee backfield type of environment going into LA. That was kind of the discussion. And so they drafted, I think, a 3rd round pick, a 4th round pick, and a 5th round pick in the next, like, you know, few years. I might have been wrong with the picks, but they were trying to posture as, okay, we're going to bring in another back to really take on some of that workload. Knowing that to the public, for me, like that's what I had going on the years before that with Melvin Gordon. It's like, okay, let's take a look. Let's see how that's starting to pan out. If it starts to pan out, we're like, yeah, it's kind of going in the direction that we thought. Then maybe that back, me at the time, wasn't going to take on as big as a workload. But if you're saying, hey, look, they're really playing Austin a lot more over the guy that they drafted or this or that, then maybe they're posturing a little bit more of, okay, maybe Austin is playing more efficient. Maybe they want to get him more touches or that player more touches. So I think looking at the past role that the person's been in, looking at the posture of the club and what they're kind of showing, and it's tough because you can't really tell until the season starts playing out. But is that next person that they thought was going to come in and either be a kind of take carries from them? Are they doing that? And if they're not, then maybe that player is going to be in a role where they have kind of the backfield to themselves. So I hope that made sense, but that's what I would say.
As someone who prayed the football gods that Duke Johnson would finally get that true 3-down role over the years, you know, I hear you there. But Austin, I wanted to ask you about your new kind of just situation in Washington this last year, because, you know, obviously with the Chargers, had more kind of stationary quarterbacks you were playing with. Old man Phillip Rivers, Justin Herbert, great quarterbacks, but obviously didn't have the wheels as Jayden Daniels. So just as a running back in pass pro, you know, kind of having a quarterback who is such a threat with his legs, like how different was that for you last year?
Yeah, it's very different. All my quarterbacks have been different. You know, starting out with Phillip Rivers, who, if he ever got in trouble, it was like, hey, check down immediately. And so that's kind of how I got my start in the league. It was catching a bunch of check downs and making stuff happen from Phillip. And then got to Justin, who doesn't necessarily can't run. He could definitely run, but his strength is just definitely throwing the ball. And, you know, that was just a different scenario. And then now with Jayden, where we almost have 2 plays in every play. I'd say the biggest difference is, obviously, if I have to do pass protection, yes, I'm going to do pass protection and block my guy. But if not, there's 2 plays. So you run your route, and then you run your second route, which is the get open route, because Jayden's running around, you know, trying to either run down the field or find you in the flats or something like that. So that's been the biggest difference, is understanding how we actually have a quarterback that can really keep the play alive for a long time.
Awesome. So we'll kind of keep it with Washington on this one. Like you just talked about Jayden Daniels, but you have a new teammate this year. You've got Deebo Samuel, and, you know, you play fantasy, so you hear what people are saying, and Deebo's at that age. He's about to be 30 years old, where people start to think, oh, the player's washed. Then there's other people, you know, Ian and I just recorded an episode about this, and we were leaning into, you know, Deebo's really been good. Had a little bit of a bad year last year, dealt with pneumonia and some of those things. But, man, we were looking at the match with Cliff Kingsbury's offense, like the number of RPO throws to wide receivers. He's one of the top guys to do that. Cliff Kingsbury also wide receiver screens, those sort of things, really, really high up there as far as his rates over the last 3 seasons as either a head coach or an offensive coordinator. So what are you seeing with Deebo and his fit in the new offense, and what element might that bring to the Commanders this season?
Yeah, I think you mentioned, you know, one of the biggest things actually, and that was kind of the RPO game that we have going on. And, you know, it kind of leans into Jayden as well, where, hey, you're either handing off to me or Brian, or Jayden's run the ball, or it's a handoff fake throw to a receiver screen. And so we've seen what Deebo has been able to do and how effective he is just getting the ball early in his hands and being able to run through tackles and break tackles and make things happen down the field as well. So I think he's going to fit in perfect. I've loved seeing him in camp. I'm super excited because I'm like, man, this team, once we get this Terry contract done, like, ooh, look out, because we got, some help, with LT coming in for our left tackle. We drafted as, first overall, or our first overall pick anyway, was another offensive lineman. So I think we're in a position where our offense has got a lot of firepower, and people like Deebo are definitely adding to that.
Dwain mentioned some of the stuff with Deebo, overcoming his injuries and, last season and having to deal with that. I thought, it was actually great to see all the juice you had last year. Had the early season kick return for a touchdown. Stupid refs had to, ruin things. But, it was 2023 where you had that week 1 high ankle sprain. And I do wonder if sometimes us fantasy people, we're very tuned into the injuries when they happen. You're questionable for the game. But once guys do start kind of playing again, maybe we forget about it more than we should. So talk about, again, just like maybe how much that high ankle sprain did influence you down the stretch in 2023, and just, how people like Dwayne and I need to be a bit more just, I guess, aware of all the pain that players continue to play through, even when they are, healthy enough to suit up.
Well, look, I guess, as a player, and injuries, they happen. But if you're ever on the field, it's not just the fantasy people that are expecting the best performance. It's also your coaches, your players, everybody. Like that, if you're on the field, we're expecting your best, even from yourself. And so, yeah, I had a high ankle sprain, at the beginning of the year, but sat out some time. It's really hard to, heal a high ankle sprain, during the season when you're getting pressured to, hey, help play. Like from yourself, I'm saying, like, I need to get out there. So you come back and it's never going to be as good as it could be because you don't have enough time to do like a full, recovery session. So that's not the point, though. The point was I'm on the field. I need to be able to perform at the highest I can. That's how I see it anyway, even though if it is affecting me or not. So if you're a fantasy person, you're like, hey, they're on the field. Why they're not playing that? I know they got an ankle. Look, it's definitely going to affect them. So take that for what it's worth. It's going to affect them. Hopefully not too much, but, you got to understand that just because they're out there playing hurt it means they hope they still can play at the highest level, but it doesn't always mean that they're going to.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, obviously you're a great NFL player, but you also love to play fantasy. So I wanted to just kind of get your thoughts like on the fantasy side of things and how you think about, building your draft strategy, which players you're wanting to target. Are you more of a film guy, or are you actually someone that likes to really dig into the data and that sort of thing as well? Or is it more of a balanced approach? Kind of what's your formula whenever you're thinking about it? Okay, this is the type of team I want to build. These are the players I want to target. Obviously, we know you're going to like some Commanders, but beyond those players, how else are you handling it?
No, I'm digging in. I'm looking at, is there, a coordinator change? I think coordinator is one of the most kind of, things that goes under the radar. Because I just think of my coordinators and the usage, like for example, the 2 highest production really league years that I had were both under Joe Lombardi. And then we lose Joe Lombardi and all of a sudden it's a different story with myself. And so because of just a knowledge of, how offenses work and how tendencies happen, especially with coordinators, that's what I look at. I want to see who the coordinator is. If we have new positions or new players coming into new positions on new teams, how do they mesh with maybe that coordinator's play style? Some players can just plug and play and they're going to get, a good workload like a Derrick Henry or like a Saquon Barkley. But, if you're talking, past first round, that's what I'm looking at. Looking at the different scenarios, who's in that room, what's injury, kind of history, things like that. So I'm definitely diving in and making sure, I feel good about my guys.
100%, man. Well, awesome stuff, Austin. Just had a few rapid fire questions for you before we go on and get out of here, mostly just about our lovely pastime of fantasy football itself. So first of all, do you consider yourself more of a full PPR, half guy, or old school standard?
Full PPR. As a running back who catches the ball a lot, we got to get that full point.
Good answer.
Fair enough. I get that. If it was up to you, do you believe kickers should be in fantasy football leagues?
100%. They affect the game, so they should definitely be in your fantasy league.
Okay. Fair enough. What is your favorite form of fantasy football? Redraft, dynasty, guillotine, whatever?
Guillotine is something that's new coming out. I'm looking forward to that. I think that could easily be my favorite, but I'm just a standard 1 year at a time type player.
I just did my first guillotine leagues last year, man. It is so much fun. Just a breath of fresh air on the waiver wire, seeing actual dogs out there. So have fun with that one. Do the Commanders have their own fantasy football league going?
We do not. We do not.
Okay. That'd be kind of fun to get one going. I don't know, just saying. I know you guys are busy enough with, trying to win real games. But last thing.
Most guys don't care about fantasy. I'm just going to put it out there.
Fair enough. I can see why. Do you enter every fantasy football draft fully planning on drafting yourself?
Yes.
Nice. Hard yes. I probably would
too. The only thing I
Dwayne,
can control in fantasy football is myself, so I'm definitely in there.
That is awesome. Well, Austin, thank you again. Again, wanted to give a shout out to your charity leagues you will be getting going on. Registration actually opens today as you're listening to this, Monday, June 16th, closes Friday, August 1st. Make sure you guys use this QR code here. Plenty of exclusive prizes. We're talking game-worn memorabilia, one-on-one video calls, game tickets, championship rings, all that and so much more. So, Austin, just again, thank you, man. And anything else you want to say about the charity leagues and the Austin Ekeler Foundation, the floor is yours.
Yeah, we'd just love to say it's an awesome opportunity. Check us out, charitydraft.com, and you can see all of the leagues that we have going on, and you can get yourself a free subscription to Fantasy Life as well. So you can get yourself some knowledge of the game just for entering in. Shout out to Fantasy Life coming through with that sponsorship. And then also win some awesome prizes, game tickets, game jerseys, gloves, things that you are not going to be able to get yourself. So, and all the money goes to a good cause. So definitely come check us out, charitydraft.com.
Again, guys, link to all that is in the description of this video. So, Austin, thank you so much again, man. Best of luck this season. And now we'll get back to the podcast.
Appreciate it.
Great stuff from Austin Ekeler. Always a good reminder that, not only Dwain is Austin so much better than us at, life and I guess real life football as well, but also happens to know a thing or two about what we call our profession. So always good to keep us humble there. But we are not done talking, I should say, about the Commanders. Time to get to the star of the show. It is the man responsible for, I think, making Matthew Berry's life just that much better overall. Jayden Daniels giving Washington their first competent quarterback really since RG3, Kirk Cousins, if you want to. So again, looking at Jayden Daniels, Dwain, one of just 4 rookie quarterbacks to score at least 20 fantasy points per game in their debut season. And it's one of these things that, given how much he runs, man, really is tough to envision the sort of, sophomore CJ Stroud-esque drop-off that we have seen happen before. So for your money's worth with Jayden Daniels, is there a legit path to overall QB1 upside here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he ran for almost 900 yards last year, 891. We also had a 3-game period in there, Ian, where he was dealing with that chest injury, and he just wasn't throwing the ball as well as what we had seen earlier in the season, wasn't running the ball as much. So he had a little period where he wasn't quite at 100%. So I think these numbers are actually a little bit under where they would have came in if he was healthy. Now, having said that, guys, we get it. Injuries are part of the game. Jayden's not necessarily the biggest guy. Took some massive hits at LSU that you outlined, Ian. But I thought he did a better job, right, last year of really trying to protect himself. So if he can stay healthy for a full season, I do think that there's even more upside. Obviously, being able to take that step in year 2, did run pretty well as far as touchdowns per attempt at 5.2%, 4.6% is the average for an NFL starter over the last 3 years. So that number could come down a little bit. But man, where I see that there's some opportunity here for Daniels, Ian, he looks like a phenomenal passer. Like, I do believe that there is a range of outcomes here where Jayden comes out and throws for 4,300, 4,400 yards and runs for 1,000. That is just so rare. We love Lamar Jackson. He doesn't carry that same ceiling, right, as a passer. I don't think we can come in and immediately hand Jayden the same rushing ceiling that we can give to Lamar, but it's pretty close, right? Now, he's not going to get the rushing touchdowns we're going to see from Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts, but again, if you could throw for 4,000 plus yards and you have a shot to run for 1,000, that is just a very, very rare combination. And it is on the table for Jayden. He threw for 3,568 yards last year, along with 25 passing touchdowns. So I do think that there's a path for him to be the QB1 overall. I've got him ranked as my QB3. I think he's going to be in the top 4. Like, it's just going to be so hard for him to not hit that number. But it won't surprise me at all, man, if he's QB2 or he's QB1 this season.
same EPA per dropback as Joe Burrow last year, actually had a higher completion percentage over expected than Patrick Mahomes. I mean, that was my takeaway because, again, we all get how just explosive he is as a rusher and all the things he can do there. And that's great and everything. But, again, it is that passing upside with room to grow, man. I mean, 7.4 yards per attempt. That's good. That was 13th. His passing touchdown rate, 5.2%. That was 8th. But he could have a spike sort of year with, additions like Laramie Tunzel helping out the offensive line, with Deebo Samuel giving him another wide receiver to throw to. I mean, again, we like Terry McLaurin, but there's a reason why we looked at this offensive environment last year and we were like, man, are we really going to see that much more than just rushing out of Daniels? Because didn't love the offensive line. The book wasn't exactly, that glowing about the whole entire Cliff Kingsbury experience. And again, we had Noah Brown, Oludumare Zaccheaus, and Diami Brown really being the next guys beyond Terry. So incredible rookie season from Jayden. Hopefully it is, again, just going to be the start of an even better career to come. Can't quite get him ahead of Lamar and Josh Allen in the ranks right now just because I've seen those guys do it. But I'll tell you what, Dwain, like right now in these early drafts, we have to kind of take all of them in that same range. So yeah, I'm fine, getting some exposure to Jayden Daniels. I would hate to be sitting here in August with 0 Daniels bags, but I could see a situation where we start getting into, ESPN, Yahoo leagues in August. We're doing our home drafts and stuff. And if we do see a round or two difference between the Lamars and Joshes and the Jayden Daniels of the world, that's a situation where I will happily buy in more drafts than not.
Yeah, I mean, his ceiling it's essentially right there with those guys. 26.8 fantasy points per game is his ceiling in our ceiling floor projection model, which takes into account variance, guys, like which stats have more variance. We also look at the caliber of the player, and we factor that in as well. But the beauty is the floor is 18 fantasy points per game. Like, I get it. We want over 20. But to have your floor is 18 is just really stupid. And his median projection is 21.8. So Jayden Daniels right there with the rest of those guys. And because of the things that we talked about, the model doesn't necessarily know how to take into account that because of like what we see with our eyes, we think that Jayden might actually be a 4,000-yard passer per game. But I've got him projected for 229, and it's giving him a ceiling of 253, which is, really strong. So I do love Jayden Daniels. And the other thing I think we'll talk more and more about, Ian, as we go on, I do think this is a year where you take one of the dual threat early quarterbacks. And the reason why is we don't have a Jayden Daniels sitting there at pick 9, at QB 9, QB 10, QB 11. Yeah, we have Justin Fields, but we kind of know what Justin Fields is as a passer, right? With Jayden last year, we knew there's this potential ceiling that he could throw for a lot of yards and run for a lot of yards, which is what we're talking about with these guys up here at the top. I get it, guys. Last year, Jalen Hurts didn't throw for a lot, but the rushing touchdowns help him overcome it. So when I look at Jayden Daniels and I look at the other 4 guys, I think this is a year where really taking one of those 4 quarterbacks in your first 4 rounds of your fantasy draft, I think it's going to be a winning strategy. There's also just some spots that we'll talk more about later where we kind of get into these flat tiers and things like that at the wide receiver and at the running back positions where I'll be sitting there, Ian, I'm like, man, I have so many questions about these players. None of them are sticking out to me. I'm like, just give me Jayden Daniels. Just give me Jalen Hurts. Just give me Josh Allen. And I've been doing that quite a bit more over the last couple of weeks in my best ball drafts.
Arguably a good year to do the kind of first or last strategy where, yeah, if you can get one of these top 4 guys, absolutely sign me up. If not, maybe good idea to wait until those final few rounds because, again, you will be shocked at some of the value that can be had. I got Brock freaking Purdy in like round 15 in one of these fantasy life mocks, Dwain. Again, just a situation where you see the runs happen, certain guys fall. Really is a situation where if you don't want to pay up super high, really would not be trying to chase that starting position in round 6 or 7. Again, you will be shocked at the value that will reveal itself. But last quick thing to touch on with the Commanders offense, we do have the tight end position, reigning starter and reigning tight end 10 in PPR points per game. Zach Ertz is back again. Hurdled a man last year, Dwain. Broke a tackle and honestly looked good out there doing it. 104 yards in his final game in that ill-fated NFC Championship loss to his former employer, the Philadelphia Eagles. But Ertz will be turning 35 next November. I don't think we're necessarily expecting him to be this great player. He's probably not going to be drafted into more leagues than not. However, decent enough late round option if you are in tight end premium leagues. If you are in best ball, you need multiple tight ends. Okay, I can get behind them there as well. Any chance, though, in your opinion, Dwain, that we do see 2024 second rounder Ben Sinnott take a step forward and maybe mess around and take this job from Mr. Ertz?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always a chance. He's got the draft capital, but he did nothing last year. I mean, and nothing is like kind of being polite. Like we're talking about a targets per route run of 5%.
Did you include the fake punt?
Yeah, I think it is in there. 0.26 yards per route run. Right. So even when he was getting on the field, and we talked about how challenged really the Commanders were for like weapons, like they had Terry McLaurin and then kind of a bunch of dudes, you would think at least when he would get on the field, like there would be a little something there. Now it's such a small sample. We can't hold it against him and say that it's never going to happen. If you go back and look at Trey McBride in his rookie year, obviously it's kind of funny that Zach Ertz was also the barrier to him breaking out sooner in his career. Like Trey McBride also wasn't very good as a rookie when he did get his opportunities, ends up being one of the best tight ends, top 2 right now in fantasy football. So never want to say never on a guy like Mr. Sinnott here. Like he could end up being a sleeper, but probably one of those things, unless we get like some really rave camp reviews, we see some good things going on in the preseason, more of a waiver wire speed dial kind of thing where we'll be keeping an eye on it because Zach Ertz is getting older. But man, I hope so. Like I don't wish anything bad against Zach Ertz, but I would love to see another young player, whether it's him or whether it's McCaffrey, somebody from last year's draft class, really step up and kind of give them some youth at the position that's on the ascension. Because if there's one thing that like we could look at the Commanders at and say it's kind of thin, there's a lot of age here. I mean, we're talking about McLaurin being 30. Deebo's almost 30. You just talked about Zach Ertz being, 49 years old. Like we need some of these younger guys to step up. Now they're not early. Sinnott was a second round. Was he second or third round draft pick? Ian? He was a second round. He was pick 53 in the 2024 draft. So he is a guy that you think that they're probably hoping, fingers crossed, that he can be better this year. So definitely a sleeper for us to remember, but probably not somebody we'll be recommending unless like the vibes start really heating up for us come training camp.
Yeah, honestly, before we even talk about Sinnott, maybe, taking Ertz's spot, let's go ahead and try to earn more targets than, John Bates out here at least. All right, that would be a good start here. Obviously didn't get really much of anything out of fellow day 2 rookie Luke McCaffrey last year, and given the addition of Deebo, tough to see that overly changing in 2025 as well. So last thing, Dwain takes us to our win total projection. They're sitting at just 9.5 right now. Obviously, you are going to see a bit of a juice on that over, but you know what? I'm buying it. Give me over 9.5 wins. Again, they've done enough to help try to improve that offensive line and wide receiver room. I don't think we're just, trotting back the same group as last year and saying, oh, it went so great, let's just run everything back again. There have been meaningful additions, and I think with a potential natural year 2 leap from Daniels, second year in the league, second year in the system, we could even see a more improved addition. So some of that fourth down efficiency, I mean, that's the part that concerns me, Dwain, because they ran so hot and what they were able to do there. Natural regression, but Dan Quinn leading the defense, I do think that this is a team that is here to stay and not so much of a one-year wonder. What say you?
I'm going to go with the under. I mean, I could easily see it being the over, but I mean, they were 8 wins, 4 wins, and then they jumped to 12. I love Jayden Daniels. I do think there's a great potential fit with Deebo if he's not washed, but I still think there's plenty of questions on the defensive side of the ball. You do have Dan Quinn, a mastermind at being able to bring in players and really use them to the best of their ability and create pressure, right? And just make opposing quarterbacks uncomfortable. Dan Quinn has done a great job with that, but when I look across their defense, it's not like there's a bunch of stars here, Ian. So I think they could end up having to be in a lot of shootouts where it really do have to lean on the offense to win. And when we say that, like, it's a little thin as far as the age and some of these other things go. So I'm going to go with the under on the Commanders. I know I could be fired after this episode by our fearless leader, Mr. Matthew Berry, but I just had to be honest.
Again, Matthew, if you're listening, Ian, pick the over on your Commanders. Dwayne over here, pick the under. Just remember that when it comes time for those raises. But we appreciate you guys tuning in. Again, continuing to rip through our team previews. Like, subscribe wherever you are. And otherwise, just have a great rest of your day. So for Dwayne, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.